You know exactly what you need to do, but something within you keeps holding you back. That inner voice, the one that whispers doubts, fears, and excuses, has stolen more dreams than any external obstacle ever could. While others move forward with unwavering determination, you remain caught in an endless cycle of planning, hesitating, and ultimately failing to act. The harsh truth is that your greatest enemy isn't out there in the world. It's the silent saboteur that lives within your own mind, disguised as your protector, your voice of reason, your cautious friend. What if Napoleon Hill, a man who dedicated 25 years to studying the principles of success at the request of Andrew Carnegie himself, could teach you how to finally silence this destructive inner dialogue? The wisdom that transformed ordinary people into legends like Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, and countless others is the same wisdom that can free you from your mental prison. This isn't just another motivational message. This is the blueprint for taking control of the voice that has been controlling you. The decision you make in this moment could be the difference between continuing the same painful cycle or finally claiming the life you've always known was possible. The voice inside you is already forming its response. The question is, will you continue to let it decide your fate? Your mind is operating on a program you didn't consciously install. Every day, you wake up with intentions to change your life, pursue your goals, and become the person you know you can be. Yet somehow, by day's end, you've made little or no progress. The voice in your head has convinced you to wait until tomorrow, until you're more prepared, until conditions are perfect. This isn't a lack of willpower or discipline, it's far more insidious. Napoleon Hill discovered through his extensive research that 98% of people are controlled by this internal dialogue rather than controlling it. The voice that tells you now isn't the right time, you aren't ready, or you might fail isn't protecting you, it's imprisoning you. And the most dangerous aspect of this prison is that you believe you're free while remaining trapped within its invisible walls. This voice didn't appear overnight. It was programmed through years of subtle conditioning from well-meaning parents who wanted to protect you from disappointment, from teachers who rewarded conformity over creativity, from a society that values certainty over courageous action. What makes this programming so powerful is that you've mistaken this voice for your own. You've accepted its limitations as truth. Today marks the moment you recognize that this voice is not your destiny, but simply a pattern that can be reprogrammed. Will you continue to let these mental chains determine what's possible for you, or will you take the first step toward freedom by acknowledging their existence? Thoughts have physical power that can either create your future or destroy it. Whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. These words from Napoleon Hill aren't just a catchy phrase, they're the fundamental principle that separates extraordinary achievers from everyone else. But what Hill discovered goes much deeper. Negative thoughts have equal power to manifest in your life. Your inner voice doesn't just reflect your reality, creates it. When Henry Ford decided to build a V8 engine cast in a single blocks, something engineering experts deemed impossible, he instructed his team to keep working until they found a solution. The conventional wisdom said it couldn't be done. But Ford refused to let that voice of limitation dictate what was possible. After multiple failures, and against all expert advice, his team succeeded in creating what was previously impossible. Ford later told Hill that the difference was simple. He made a decision and refused to entertain the possibility of failure. This mastery of thought isn't mystical, it's methodical. Hill documented that the world's most successful people share one common trait. They direct their thoughts with surgical precision rather than allowing their thoughts to direct them. When that inner voice says impossible, they immediately counter it. When it predicts failure, they redirect it toward solutions. When it focuses on obstacles, they train it to focus on opportunities. The voice in your head right now is generating thoughts about what you're reading. Is it telling you this is just another motivational message? Or is it recognizing that you're being handed the exact tool you need to transform your life? The power to choose which thoughts you entertain is the first step toward freedom. What choice will you make? Your greatest enemy wears the mask of your protector. The inner voice that sabotages your progress isn't shouting, it's whispering. It doesn't announce itself as your destroyer, presents itself as your cautious friend, your voice of reason, your protector from pain and disappointment. This is why it's so dangerous. You welcome its counsel because you believe it has your best interests at heart. Napoleon Hill called this voice the protective faculty, and identified it as the primary reason most people never reach their potential. It speaks with authority, using phrases like, "Be realistic," "Don't get your hopes up," "Remember what happened last time," "People like us don't do things like that." These messages sound reasonable, even wise, because they promise to keep you safe from failure, rejection, and disappointment. Consider Thomas Edison, who failed over 10,000 times before successfully creating the electric light bulb. Had he listened to his protective inner voice after the 100th failure or even the 1,000th, the world might have waited decades longer for this revolutionary invention. Instead, Edison famously reframed each failure as successfully eliminating another approach that wouldn't work, bringing him one step closer to success. Your silent saboteur gains its power through disguise. It masks fear as prudence, laziness as patience, and resignation as wisdom. It convinces you that waiting is the same as preparing, that thinking about action is a substitute for taking action, that someday is a legitimate point on the calendar. Once you learn to recognize these disguises, to see the saboteur beneath the mask of the protectorate's power over you begins to diminish. What messages has your protective faculty been whispering to you? What dreams has it talked you out of pursuing? What actions has it convinced you to postpone? The moment you identify these whispers for what they truly are, not protection but prison guards, is the moment you begin to break free. Are you ready to see the saboteur for what it really is? Replace the voice of doubt with the voice of deliberate creation. Andrew Carnegie, once the richest man in the world, shared a secret with Napoleon Hill that became the foundation of Hill's life work. Carnegie explained that extraordinary achievement doesn't come from extraordinary circumstances, but from taking control of your inner conversation. The difference between success and failure often comes down to 6 words: I can't versus I can and will. Hill documented this pattern across hundreds of the world's most successful people. When obstacles appeared, average people allowed their inner voice to say, "This proves it's too difficult." Exceptional people trained their inner voice to say, "This challenge is showing me exactly what I need to overcome." Same circumstance, radically different interpretation, completely different outcome. This isn't positive thinking, strategic thinking. Edwin C. Barnes, a penniless farm boy, decided he would become Thomas Edison's business partner, despite having no connections, no money, and no obvious path forward. Most people would have heard an inner voice saying, "Be realistic, this is impossible." But Barnes trained his inner voice to focus on how rather than if. He didn't silence the doubt. He redirected it toward problems. Years later, after starting as a floor sweeper in Edison's company, Barnes indeed became Edison's partner and made a fortune marketing the Edison dictating machine. The Carnegie formula is simple but profound. First, identify what your inner voice is currently saying about your goals. Second, consciously create the internal dialogue that would support those goals. Third, repeat this new dialogue so frequently that it becomes automatic. Your mind can only entertain one thought at a time. When you deliberately choose that thought, the sabotaging voice loses its platform. What dialogue would support the life you actually want to create? What would your inner voice say if it were fully aligned with your highest ambitions? Will you continue with the default programming that keeps you small, or will you install the dialogue of the person you're capable of becoming? Fear is a reaction. Courage is a decision. Your inner voice speaks loudest when you stand at the edge of your comfort zone. It magnifies potential dangers, exaggerates possible pain, and minimizes potential rewards. This is your brain's fear response, an evolutionary mechanism designed to keep you safe in a world of physical threats. But in today's world, this same mechanism often keeps you trapped in mediocrity by convincing you that psychological discomfort is as dangerous as physical pain. Napoleon Hill studied this phenomenon extensively, concluding that fear is the single greatest destroyer of human potential. Not external fear, but internal fear, the anticipated pain of failure, rejection, or embarrassment. This fear doesn't protect you. It paralyzes you. It doesn't serve you. It sabotages you. And most critically, it speaks to you through that inner voice that sounds so reasonable, so protective, so wise. Consider how many decisions you make from fear rather than possibility. The job you stay in because changing feels too risky. The relationship you remain in because being alone seems frightening. The business you don't start because failure seems unbearable. The conversation you avoid because rejection feels too painful. Behind each of these decisions is that voice, whispering about all the things that could go wrong. Helen Keller, who overcame being both deaf and blind to become one of the most influential people of her time, said, "Security is mostly a superstition. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing." She recognized that the voice of fear offers a false promise. It suggests that playing it safe leads to security, when in reality, it leads to regret. The pattern break begins with a simple but profound shift. When that voice of fear speaks, don't try to silence it. Instead, acknowledge it, thank it for its concern, and then consciously choose courage anyway. Fear and courage can coexist. The difference is in which one you allow to make the final decision. What decision have you been postponing because your inner voice has convinced you it's too risky? What might be possible if you made that decision from courage rather than fear? The pattern that has held you back for years can be broken in a single moment of courage. Will this be that moment? Your inner dialogue requires outside perspective. We all have blind spots, patterns of thinking so familiar that we can't recognize them without external input. Napoleon Hill discovered that even the most successful people in the world relied on what he called a mastermind, a group of carefully selected individuals who would provide perspective, challenge assumptions, and offer insights that would have remained invisible otherwise. This principle applies powerfully to your inner dialogue. The voice in your head has been speaking to you for so long that you've lost the ability to question its authority or accuracy. You need outside perspective, not just for your plans and goals, but for the very thoughts that are creating your reality. When Henry Ford faced seemingly insurmountable production problems, he didn't rely solely on his own thinking. He gathered minds that thought differently than his own. Similarly, when your inner voice tells you something is impossible, unrealistic, or too risky, you need perspectives that challenge this limited thinking. These perspectives can come from mentors, books, courses, peers, or coaches, anyone who can recognize and question the limiting patterns your inner voice has normalized. Charles Schwab, who became the highest paid executive in America during Hill's research, attributed much of his success to regularly exposing his thinking to challenging perspectives. He understood that the most dangerous limitations are the ones we accept without question the assumptions our inner voice presents as indisputable facts. The mastermind principle isn't just about getting advice. It's about deliberately seeking perspectives that challenge your current thinking. It's about inviting trusted others to question the voice that has been directing your decisions. Without this external input, your inner dialogue will continue recycling the same limiting beliefs, presenting them as truth and keeping you trapped in familiar patterns. Who can you invite into your inner conversation? Who has the insight, courage, and care to question the voice that's been limiting you? The greatest prison break often begins when someone else helps you see the bars that have become invisible to you. Who will help you see yours? A powerful why drowns out the voice of cannot. Scattered focus creates scattered results. Napoleon Hill observed that the most successful people he studied shared one common trait. They had a definite major purpose that organized all their thinking and action. This singular focus didn't just drive their external behavior, it fundamentally altered their inner dialogue. When your mind lacks a compelling destination, your inner voice fills the vacuum with doubts, distractions, and diversions. But when you commit to a specific, compelling purpose, that same voice begins to organize itself around how rather than whether. The questions change from, "Should I really do this?" to "How can I make this happen despite the obstacles?" Consider the transformation of W. Clement Stone, who built a $100 million insurance empire from a $100 investment during the Great Depression. Stone didn't just have goals, he had a definite purpose that consumed his thinking. When others heard an inner voice saying, "These economic conditions make success impossible," Stone's inner voice was busy solving the question of how to succeed despite these conditions. His definite purpose was so compelling that it redirected his inner dialogue away from limitations and toward creative solutions. This is the paradox Hill discovered. The more specific and compelling your purpose, the more flexible and creative your thinking becomes. Vague aspirations produce vague results. But a purpose so clear and compelling that you can describe it in a single sentence has the power to transform your inner conversation from doubt to determination. Your inner voice right now is either supporting a definite purpose or substituting endless deliberation for decisive action. It's either organizing your mental resources around a clear target or diffusing them through endless questioning. A definite purpose doesn't silence the inner voice, it redirects it from why not to how yes. What would constitute a purpose so compelling that it would reorganize your inner dialogue? What goal is important enough to transform the voice of doubt into the voice of determination? The power to choose this purpose and to let it transform your inner conversation is available to you right now. Will you exercise it? Your inner voice misunderstands the true nature of failure. The fear of failure has killed more dreams than failure itself ever could. Your inner voice has convinced you that failure is evidence of your inadequacy, proof that you were foolish to try, confirmation that you should lower your expectations. Napoleon Hill discovered that this misinterpretation of failure is the primary reason most people never discover their true capabilities. Through his extensive interviews with the world's most accomplished individuals, Hill uncovered a startling pattern. The most successful people had experienced the most failures. What distinguished them wasn't an absence of failure, but a fundamentally different relationship with it. They trained their inner voice to interpret failure not as a terminal event, but as temporary feedback, not as a judgment of their worth, but as a teacher pointing toward improvement. Consider R.H. Macy. who failed in 7 consecutive businesses before finally succeeding with his department store in New York. Had he allowed his inner voice to interpret these failures as evidence of his inadequacy, one of the world's most iconic retail brands would never have existed. Instead, he trained that voice to ask, "What can I learn from this that will improve my next attempt?" This transformation begins with recognizing a simple truth. Failure is an event, not a person. When your inner voice says, "You are a failure," it is lying. The accurate statement is, "That attempt failed." This distinction might seem semantic, but it reshapes your entire relationship with risk, growth, and achievement. One interpretation leads to shame and retreat. The other leads to learning and advancement. Hill documented that Thomas Edison's inner dialogue about his thousands of failed attempts to create the light bulb was fundamentally different from how most people talk to themselves about much smaller failures. Edison famously said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." This wasn't positive thinking that recognized the temporary and instructive nature of what others call failure. How would your life change if your inner voice interpreted your past failures not as reasons to retreat, but as the necessary education for your future success? What might you attempt if that voice spoke of failure not with fear but with curiosity? The same events that have convinced you to play small could become the very reasons you play bigger than ever before. Will you continue with the old interpretation, or are you ready for the new? Silence the voice of hesitation through immediate movement. Analysis paralysis, the state of overthinking, to the point of inaction isn't accidental. It's the direct result of an inner voice that has been trained to value perfect decisions over decisive action. Napoleon Hill discovered that the most successful people weren't those who made the best initial decisions, but those who made decisions quickly and changed them slowly if at all. Your inner voice has likely convinced you that more information, more planning, and more preparation will lead to better outcomes. But Hill's research revealed the opposite. Beyond a certain threshold, additional analysis rarely improves decision quality, but consistently decreases decision speed. The voice that says, "Just a bit more research," or "Let me think about it a little longer," isn't your ally in success, it's your accomplice in procrastination. Consider General Douglas MacArthur, one of the most decorated military leaders in American history. When faced with complex decisions under life-or-death pressure, MacArthur relied on a principle he shared with Hill. It is better to be executing the wrong plan than to be doing nothing. He understood that the momentum of decisive action could overcome the disadvantages of an imperfect plan, while perfect planning without action accomplishes nothing. The habit of decisive action isn't about recklessness. It's about recognizing that your inner voice will never stop finding reasons to wait, to gather more information, to delay until conditions are perfect. The most successful people train that voice to focus not on finding reasons to wait, but on finding ways to begin. They understand that clarity comes through action, not beforehand. This habit develops through practice, specifically by setting and acting upon increasingly shorter time frames between decision and action. When you feel the impulse to achieve something, act within the first 5 seconds. When you identify a necessary phone call, make it immediately. When you recognize a needed conversation, initiate it now. Each decisive action weakens the voice of hesitation and strengthens the habit of implementation. What decision have you been postponing under the guise of thinking it through? What action have you delayed while telling yourself you're still preparing? The voice that promises better outcomes through endless deliberation is silenced. Most effectively not through more thinking, but through immediate action. Will this be the moment you stop listening to hesitation and start the habit of decisive movement? install the inner voice that will direct your future. Everything you've learned so far culminates in this critical step, creating and installing a new inner dialogue, what Napoleon Hill called your definite command. This isn't a goal statement, a mission statement, or an affirmation. It is a clear, specific, emotionally charged directive from you to your subconscious mind about who you are becoming and what you will achieve. When Andrew Carnegie shared this technique with Hill, he explained that the subconscious mind responds most powerfully to commands that are repeated with emotional intensity and unwavering consistency. Your current inner voice gained its authority through years of repetition. Your new command will replace it through the same process, but deliberately accelerated. Hill documented how Mahatma Gandhi used this principle to transform himself from a timid young lawyer into one of history's most influential leaders. Gandhi didn't begin with extraordinary courage. He created it by repeatedly commanding his mind to embody the qualities his mission required. His inner voice didn't accidentally align with his greatest purpose. He deliberately trained it through what Hill later called autosuggestion, the practice of giving direct commands to your subconscious mind until they become your default inner dialogue. Your definite command must meet 5 criteria to effectively reprogram your inner voice. First, it must be in the present tense, as if already accomplished, even if your current reality doesn't yet reflect it. Second, it must be specific about both the what and the when, leaving your mind no room for vague intentions. Third, it must be emotionally charged, engaging both your intellect and your feelings. Fourth, it must be repeated daily, ideally multiple times daily with full attention and conviction. Fifth, it must be your own authentic directive, not someone else's expectation or a socially acceptable compromise. The difference between those who continually struggle against their inner dialogue and those who harness its power often comes down to this single practice, deliberately installing the internal commands that align with their highest purpose, rather than unconsciously accepting whatever programming they received by default. What command would transform your inner dialogue if you installed it with unwavering consistency? What directive would align your subconscious mind with your most important goals? The power to reprogram the voice that has been directing your life is available to you now. Will you use it? Every transformation begins with a single, irrevocable choice. You stand now at a crossroads that most people never recognize exists. Before you lie two paths that look remarkably similar but lead to radically different destinations. One path continues with your inner voice operating on its current programming, familiar, comfortable, and ultimately limiting. The other begins the deliberate reprogramming of that voice to align with your highest potential. Napoleon Hill observed that the most successful people he studied could identify the exact moment when they made the decision that changed everything. It wasn't when they achieved their first major success. It wasn't when they received recognition. It was the moment they decided with absolute conviction that they would no longer accept the limitations their inner voice had been enforcing. For Henry Ford, it was the moment he decided that regardless of expert opinions or previous failures, his company would create a V8 engine cast in a single block. For Thomas Edison, it was when he committed to creating the electric light, despite thousands of failed attempts. For Helen Keller, it was when she refused to let her blindness and deafness define what was possible for her life. The difference between these extraordinary achievers and those who live with quiet regret isn't talent, opportunity, or circumstance. It's the decision to take control of their inner dialogue rather than remaining at its mercy. It's the choice to direct their thoughts rather than being directed by them. It's the commitment to installing a new inner voice aligned with their highest purpose. This decision isn't made once and then forgotten. It's renewed each time the old programming reasserts itself. It's strengthened each time you redirect a limiting thought toward a more empowering alternative. It's reinforced each time you take action despite the voice of fear and hesitation. What begins as conscious effort gradually becomes unconscious pattern, new inner voice that propels rather than restrains. The ultimate question isn't whether you can do this. Napoleon Hill's extensive research proves that this capacity exists within every person. The question is whether you will. Whether this moment will be remembered as the turning point, when you took control of the inner voice that had been controlling you. Whether today marks the beginning of a new inner dialogue that will create a new future. The decision is yours, and it's available right now. The same inner voice that has limited you is capable of liberating you. The same mind that has housed your fears can become the home of your most extraordinary achievements. The same internal dialogue that has reinforced your limitations can become the very force that shatters them. What will you decide? Transformation isn't something you do. It's something you allow. The journey from being controlled by your inner voice to controlling it isn't about forcing change through willpower alone. It's about awakening to the power that has always existed within you, the power to choose which thoughts you entertain, which beliefs you accept, and which internal dialogue directs your actions. Napoleon Hill discovered a paradox that puzzled him initially but eventually became the cornerstone of his philosophy. The most powerful people are those who surrender to a greater power within themselves. Not through passive acceptance, but through active recognition of and alignment with their deepest capabilities. This awakening has three distinct phases. First comes awareness, recognizing the inner voice that has been silently directing your life. You've already begun this phase by identifying how your internal dialogue has limited your actions and achievements. This awareness alone places you ahead of the 98% of people who remain unconscious of the programming controlling their lives. The second phase is alignment, deliberately bringing your inner dialogue into harmony with your highest purpose and potential. Through the principles and practices you've learned, you're establishing a new relationship with your thoughts, training your inner voice to support rather than sabotage your growth. The final phase is allowance, creating the internal conditions for your natural power to express itself fully. This isn't about forcing yourself to become something you're not. It's about removing the internal obstacles that have prevented you from becoming everything you already are. When Thomas Edison was asked how it felt to fail 10,000 times before successfully creating the light bulb, he responded, "I didn't fail 10,000 times. The light bulb was an invention with 10,000 steps." This profound reframe wasn't just positive thinking. It was an alignment with the deeper truth of his journey. His inner voice wasn't minimizing reality. It was recognizing a more empowering interpretation of it. You can't control every circumstance in your life. You can't dictate every outcome of your efforts. But you can absolutely, and without question, determine the inner voice that interprets those circumstances and responds to those outcomes. This is the ultimate power that Napoleon Hill discovered in his 25 years of studying the world's most accomplished individuals. The voice inside you right now is either reinforcing old limitations or awakening new possibilities. It's either repeating familiar doubts or crafting a new narrative of capability and purpose, or conscious and liberating. This is your awakening. Not to something new, but to something that has always been within you, waiting to be recognized, aligned with, and fully expressed. The power to control the inner voice that has been controlling you isn't something you need to create. It's something you need to claim. Claim it now.